Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And of course, you can read my work on ESPN.com. I'll have a story later in the week, just kind of looking at the Commanders' offseason, some of the big moves they might try to make, and other moves they may have to make or want to make, I should say. So anyway, so stay tuned for that. In a minute, I'll be joined by former Washington Redskin tight end Logan Paulsen, who of course is now an analyst for the team. So before I get there, actually, the reason I want to have Logan on again, I just had him on the other week, last week, and we talked at that point about the offseason, kind of looking ahead, just areas to address, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now, because the combine is underway, wanted to talk to Logan about the combine, what goes on there, what things that he looks for that he thinks are important, and then also a few kind of funny things about things that players would do to help themselves gain a little bit more height or a little bit more weight because it can make a big difference. So stay tuned for all that in a minute with Logan. Before I get there, just a couple things. So for you Gold members, I'll be doing the Zoom at 7:30 Eastern time on Thursday night. I know I messed up last week, so I'm going to do one this week. Hadn't planned on it, but I want to do it this week. I'll also be joined this week by Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders. So good chance for you to ask whatever you want to ask them. Just learn about the play-by-play voice and learn about more about what we do and also about what we think might happen this off season. So just a good chance to talk to two people who are around the team all the time. So anyways, and if you want to become a club member, go to the Empire Media YouTube page, see the word join, click on there, go from there. And I did a private Zoom with the regular club members last week. I'll be doing more of those throughout the off season with them as well. So anyways, so stay tuned for that on Thursday night. And also two more things. One, Sam Fortier from the Washington Post will join me for Thursday as we talk about the combine. So on Tuesday, Adam Peters will address the media, and then on Wednesday it'll be Dan Quinn and Lance Newmark. So what might we learn from them, and then also more or less what does it mean for the rest of the offseason, but then also what we think might take place, because over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk a lot about players they may sign, re-sign, and then go pursue, and players they may cut. Will they part ways with John Allen, maybe an Andrew Wiley? Stay tuned for all that. So Sam and I will start talking about a lot of that for Thursday's podcast. And there you go. That's it. Also don't forget with Logan, you can listen to him on the Take Command podcast with Craig Hoffman. He also does work for the Command Center with the Commanders. So anyways, without further ado, here's my conversation with former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen. All right, Logan. Well, this is kind of part two of our conversation, but I wanted to talk about the combine because that's this week. And as this airs, it'll be this week. So I'm curious from your perspective, how important does the combine remain given all the film that's out there and all the stuff that people can see? How important does this remain?
Yeah, I think it's definitely becoming less important from a physical standpoint. Like obviously it's a great time to get like height, weight, arm length, hand measurements. All those things are incredibly important in terms of evaluation. But when you talk to teams, a lot of them say we use GPS data rather than, 40-yard dash time. Or if the 40-yard dash is way off, we'll go back and kind of reevaluate the GPS data. So to me, I think the most important stuff, obviously the physical measurements, but kind of even further is the meetings, right? You only get a couple. Interestingly enough, you only get a couple interactions with some of these prospects, right? You get the Senior Bowl, you get the Combine, you get their pro day, and it's really an opportunity. And then obviously the 30 visits or whatever they are, you know what I mean?
Right.
But those interactions are the thing that really helps drive home whether or not this is the right guy for a Washington Commander or, to be a San Francisco 49er or whatever that is, right? How are they going to fit in your culture? How are they going to kind of be as a worker? How are they as guys? Are they going to get along with people in the building? Do they love football? And so that's really why this becomes such a big deal, is because of those meetings. The informal and the formal meetings are extremely valuable. And so I think that's where the value still remains relatively high. Like if I'm an athlete now coming out of college and I'm not going to run fast or I'm not going to jump high, I'm just not going to do the combine anymore because it only can hurt you. So, but the interviews are the things that I think are extremely, extremely valuable. And I think they will remain valuable because they are such a key data point for the teams.
How different for you when you came out? how
Yeah.
different is it in terms of the mindset? And again, like in your spot, you're going to be an undrafted guy and all that. So you want to get in front of you do as much as you can. But even from the top guys, how big a difference is it from then to now?
Yeah, so I didn't go to the combine, but I just think about the
Okay.
mindset of people going to the combine, right? Like the guys that I trained with, the guys that I went to school with who were going to the combine. It was a do or die event. It was you had to run the 40, you had to do the vertical. You lost some of you didn't have the control that the guys do now. So I think that's one of the things, especially if you're a top prospect, top 10 prospect, top 15 prospect, shoot, first round pick. I would probably do very little at the combine because it's going to hurt you. Now, if I'm the third defensive edge in the class and I'm going to run a 4-3, like I'm going to get out there and run a 4-3. Like it's a job interview. I'm going to do the things that are going to help me. I'm not going to do the things that are going to hurt me. And so I think that's something that I've seen change pretty dramatically. I've also seen, just a general, and I think this is a really interesting change in football in general, just a lack of emphasis on, absolute strength. Like the bench press used to be something that was very big for tight ends, for offensive linemen. It's become less important, right? Because I think people understand that it's a game that requires really tremendous movement skills. And that's something that I've seen change over the last during my time playing for sure. When I was at so for example, like I did 26 bench press reps. That was kind of middle of the road for tight ends at the time. Now that would have been best in the class last year, right? Like it's changed. The priority for the positions changed. The emphasis on certain events has changed. And I really think the main thing that I take away when I go to the combine and watch is the field work, just to get a feel for how they are when they're receiving coaching, how they are with other guys in the group, how they move around freely. So I think all that stuff, again, the emphasis on which drills are important has changed. The emphasis on the athlete kind of taking ownership has changed. And I think that's all for the better for the athlete, which is really important.
You ever ask Fred about his glorious rep on the
Oh
240?
my gosh, you don't have to ask him about it. He'll just tell you about it. Like he'll just given any opportunity, he'll tell you about it. So, yeah, man, the bench press, and for a DB, I could care less about your bench press reps.
Well, and so when you're there, like watching, like is there a drill that you particularly like to watch versus like the public and the media seem fascinated on the reps and then the
Mm.
40 time? What are some of the drills that you say this matters more to me when I'm trying to evaluate someone?
Sure. Like, so if I'm looking at like just general explosive measurements, I look at the 40, the vertical, and the broad jump and kind of aggregate those together. And if one of those is really good, then I know the athlete's explosive. If he's supposed to be an explosive guy, then one of those should be pretty explosive. If they're not explosive, then I got to go back and reevaluate my film study. So that's one measurement. Obviously, if the weight room's terrible, like if they haven't, if they're an offensive lineman and they bench press 5 times, that's terrible. Like that's something I'm going to look at because it reflects more of a work ethic, right? Like you knew you had to do this and you had months to prepare and you came out and did 5 reps. So how important is this to you? And so that's where, again, like kind of reevaluating those interviews, going to talk to his strength staff, kind of getting a better feel for who the guy is going to be really important. But to me, the number one thing, like for each position, outside of those things I just laid out, is watching them move around on the field. So like for the defensive linemen, like when they do those bag drills and drills, like how do they bend? How do they compete? How do they move in those spaces? Because if you see some drastic stiffness, like that becomes a big red flag to me. Or if you're watching a DB and you realize their hips are way tighter when they're doing that back pedal drill than you saw in film, I got to go back and rewatch that again. So really just getting a feel for the athletes is something that's really important. Offensive linemen, same thing. Like when they do that pull drill, like how do they get out in space? Does it look like they're pulling a tractor or are they kind of free movers? Can they adjust to the second level? Those things are really important to me because then it kind of says, do I need to go back and reevaluate my film study or am I on the right track with this guy?
Yeah, and the other thing too, when you talk to coaches about like pro days, for example, which I would think would apply somewhat to here, they
Yeah,
want to see how the athletes interact with other players.
100%.
And so like there's a lot more things I think that they're going to look for that have nothing to do with what the drills that they're doing.
One of the things I said too is like, how are you in the group? Are
Right.
you leading the group? Are you encouraging other guys? Are you being supportive? Are you being competitive? Do you want to be the first one in the drill? Like all those things are incredibly important to me when I watch. And again, because if a guy's standoffish, if he's like, there was one year a guy did a drill. He was like kind of standing off in the back by himself. And you're like, what's that guy's deal? Like, why is he not participating in the fellowship and the community of the combine? And again, that just raises red flags where you kind of go back and maybe you ask somebody that knows him, is like, what kind of guy is he? And they say, oh, he's kind of like that, and he doesn't really get along with the team well. And it's like, well, do I want that guy as a Washington Commander? Does he fit with this brotherhood identity that we've got? And so those are the details that you pick up. Where again, then in a meeting at the pro day, at the combine, you can have a follow up and be like, hey man, what's going on? Like, why are people saying this about you?
So that player that you saw, what was the result for him in the NFL?
I don't remember, because every year there's a couple that are a little bit standoffish, right? And so sometimes they do it because they're hyper competitive and they want to win and they don't want to be involved. Sometimes they do it because they're lazy. The lazy ones, in my experience, tend not to do very well. They'll kind of have one good year, they'll kind of flake out someplace, they'll bounce around a little bit. But the guys that do it because they're like dyed in the wool competitors are the guys that you really like. And again, it's hard to discern that from the stands, but it is one of those things where, like, if you were to talk to the guy, I think that would come through very clearly.
So are there little tricks they can do for the height and weight that people don't know about?
Yeah. So obviously, like, if you know when the weigh-in is, like, you'll see guys just literally chug a bunch of water. And I had this crazy coach in college who made like a pair of like jock strap, basically, that he was able to kind of fill into like his butt crack. You know what I mean? So when he went for the weigh-in, he weighed like 10 pounds more than he said, right? So like that's an extreme example of like one way back in the day. And then obviously the water thing's huge. And then for the height, one of the things they tell you is pick your toes off the ground and then don't let me push you down. So what guys started doing is lifting their toes off the ground with their heels slightly off the ground. So they're on the ball of their foot, and they're kind of gaining, a half inch of space on the back end. So now you'll see guys like check the heels when they're doing measurements. So there's a couple of things that people do. They'll kind of try to trick you, like arm length measurement for the vertical. Like they'll get out there and they'll kind of sit up there with a bent arm so that like they touch a lower marker. So they're actually looks like they're jumping higher. There's a couple little tricks. The 40 thing, like with the electrical handle on there, like you used to be able to, when it was a pressure sensor, kind of roll into your 40 and do all sorts of different stuff. So there's all sorts of tricks, that's why people pay all this money for combine prep, to help you kind of find these little nicks and knacks to give you those tenths of seconds or inches on the vertical.
So you told me one time about the height thing. I was at the doctor's the other day getting measured, and I'm like, I'm going to do that because I'm going to cling. I want every inch of height that I can get at this stage of my life. So it did help me. I'm still over 5'9", so it definitely helped me. So the weight thing is like, I'd rather subtract it at this point.
Yeah, get rid of weight, right? Yeah.
but that is funny. Like that still happens a lot.
Now they do all the weigh-ins with those like tight spandex on, so it becomes a little bit harder to have some of these additions. But I do think, like, if you're a small receiver, like I had a client last year who said he drank about a gallon of water before the weigh-in. So he weighs in, instead of 243, he weighs in at 252. And I will say on the sheet that looks a little bit better, you know what I mean? Wow. And you're like, oh, okay, like good job, good for you. And especially at a thing like a Senior Bowl where the weigh-in is on a different day than the practices. So guys will really go crazy in those events and come in way heavier than you think, or, way lighter than you think, because they don't have anything to do. I think now they do the weigh-in. I forget. I have to double check my notes, but now they've moved the weigh-in so it's a little bit closer proximity to when you run. So guys don't like to do that quite as much.
Well, I guess if you're not going to run, then you can go put on the weight.
Yes, right. Absolutely. That's what Bryce Young did a couple years ago, right? He came in, he weighed over 200 pounds, and you can get, I guarantee you that was all water weight and, like a couple steak dinners the night before.
Very good. Logan, I appreciate your time. Always enjoyed. Have fun.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Logan for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Thursday with another episode. So I'll talk to you next time.